G'day everyone, my name is Hoi, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make two custom hairbrushes in Photoshop. The first hairbrush that we're going to create is a straight hairbrush, and we're going to use this image to test our brush on. The second brush that we're going to create is a more tightly curled brush, so we're going to use this image to test our brush on. So to get started, let's create a canvas that's 1500 pixels wide and 1500 pixels high. So if you're following along, you can go to File, New, and on the right hand side you can copy my settings here. The width of 1500, just make sure that pixels is selected, height 1500, and then you can copy all these settings here and then press create. I'm going to press close because I've already got my canvas there. Now the first thing that we need to do is create some blobs on this canvas. Let's invoke our brush by typing B on our keyboard, and at the moment just to make sure that we've all got our soft round brush, we can go click on this down arrow here and just click on soft round brush here. Now I've got my hardness at 85%, and that's because that I don't want a hardness of all the way up to 100% because the edge of the hair will be very harsh. So I want a little bit of softness there, and whatever size that you've got is okay. I've got it at 328 pixels. We're going to resize that anyway, so it doesn't really matter what size it is at the moment. I'm going to click out of that. Let's resize our brush. You can hit the square left bracket key next to the P key or the right bracket key next to it to resize it upwards. So I'm just going to make some dots of varying shapes, and before we do, I almost forgot, make sure that your black is your foreground color here. If you don't have black as your foreground color, hit D on your keyboard and that will reset it for default colors. Make sure your opacity is 100, your flow is 100, and that's important because in a brush what we want to show has to be black, and everything else, if you don't want it to show, has to be white. If there's any gray in your image, that means there's some level of transparency there, and for our purposes we don't want any transparency, so we need it to be a solid black color here. And we don't want to draw on the background layer directly, so we're going to create a new layer. So let's go to our new layer icon here, click once here, and just make sure that you've got the layer 1 selected. While we're here, let's double click on that and just type in straight brush, well, straight hairbrush, and press enter so we can keep track of what we're doing. Now let's create some dots on this layer here. So at the moment I've got this size brush, so I'm just going to press once here, and the name of the game is just to make random dots here. So when we drag the brush, it will create the stroke of the hair. So I'm just going to vary the size of this so it's not all the same size, and we're just going to click here once, click here once. And the reason why I chosen a canvas of 1500 is because the maximum size of your brush can only be 5000 pixels, and a brush size of 1500 is probably more than what you need in most cases. Now if you needed a much bigger size, then obviously you can make your canvas a lot bigger. What you don't want to do is start off with a small size and then scale it up, because these brushes are pixel based, and as with anything pixel based, once you resize it up beyond its 100% size, it will start to pixelate. Now the next thing to do is to tell Photoshop this is the pattern that we want to make the brush out of. But as you can see, this, it's got white spaces here and here, and I want to crop it tightly so it only contains, my canvas only contains the dots inside of it. So what I can do is press Command on my keyboard and then just go to my layer here, press once on my mouse, and that will select everything that I've just created. Press C on my keyboard to invoke the crop tool, and then press once on the enter or return keyboard, and then once again to confirm it, and that will just crop the canvas according to the boundaries of your image there. Once I've got that, let's go to edit and then go all the way down to define brush preset, and then you can type in whatever name that you want. I'll just type in dash HTP straight hairbrush. And let me just explain what this number means. Is 1293 at the moment, and that's the size of the canvas. So let's press OK, and there you have it. That's our brush there, but it's not very exciting. Now before we test it on this model here, we need to customize our brush. Otherwise it's just going to be these straight dotty patterns, which we don't want, and I've just ruined my image by painting directly on the background. So I'm just going to press Command Z a few times to undo that. So let's customize our brush by going back to our tab here. Now remember, I've cropped this to fit the image of the dots here, so I don't want it to be cropped that tight again. So I'm just going to press Command Z, and I'm going to deselect that by pressing Command D, and just going to fit it to screen, Command 0. Now that's a bunch of keyboard shortcuts for you. Now I'm going to turn off this layer here so I can work on a different layer to test out my brush here. So let's resize our brush. Now remember, it's the left bracket key to resize it smaller, or it's the right bracket key to make it bigger. So I'm just going to test it out, something like this, and let's just see the default here. So I'm just going to paint it a little bit here, and you can see that it's nothing like a hairbrush, and that's because we need to change some of the settings. So I'm going to press F5 on my keyboard to bring up the brush settings window. The other way of bringing the brush settings window is going to Window, and then just make sure that your brush settings is selected here. Let's click out of that, and the first thing that we'll do is just to change the brush tip shape. So let's click on that, and then with the spacing, it determines how far apart your dots are. So I don't want any spacing in there, so I'm just going to dial it down to 1%. Now as you can see, there's a whole bunch of settings here, but we're not going to change most of it for this brush setting here. So for this one, we're going to just click on transfer. For the next brush, the curly hair brush, we're going to play around with some of these, but we'll leave it for the next brush here. For the time being, let's press transfer. And what we want to do is select pen pressure, which I've already got it for my opacity jitter, and then pen pressure for my flow jitter. And what this basically means is that I'm going to use my Wacom pen, which is a tablet, to adjust my opacity. Now jitter, whenever you see that in the context of your brush setting, just means variation. So how much you're going to vary your opacity, and that would depend on how heavy I press on my brush. And similarly, your flow, that will be determined by my pen from my Wacom tablet. Now don't worry, for all the mouse users out there, I will go through how to do it with the mouse. So let me just turn that on and off so you can see what that does to the brush. So if I turn that off, you can see that this automatically changes back to sort of a more solid feel. If I turn it back on, it relies on the pressure, and that's the effect that we're going for. Let's go back to my canvas here. Let's just hide that for a sec. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to press, just make sure that my layer 1 is selected. Press Command A and then delete that on my canvas. Now I'm going to deselect that selection, Command D. Now I'm going to take my Wacom pen now. I'm just going to test out my pen, and it's still okay, but it's nothing like a strand of hair. So what I'm going to do here is just going to adjust the flow to really, really low. Now this will take some experimentation, but let's start off with a flow of 5%, and let's reduce the brush size. So to down about something like this, and it will just take some experimentation. So you can see here that's already looking like a strand of hair. So what you can do is just wave it around, some crisscrossing across the hair here, and you can already see that it's really taking shape here. So if I spend the time to sort of color this in, you can see that it's taking shape here. And if I change the color of the brush to say white, I can also add the effect of some highlights here. So white is my background color here. So I'm just going to switch it by pressing X on my keyboard. And then I might just paint it so delicately. Remember, this is based on pen pressure. And you can see here now that is taking shape here. Now, obviously, you can change the color of your brush by clicking on the palette here, and depending on the color that you want, you might change it to, say, this golden color here, and then sort of start painting it there, right? So now I want to show you how to create the same effect but using the mouse. So let's bring up our brush settings panel. I can do that by pressing F5 on my keyboard, or remember, you can go to Window and Brush Settings just to make sure that it is selected. So for those who have mouse and don't have a pen, you can go back to our transfer. Now make sure that you're on the transfer menu. If you simply click on the check mark here, you're simply just applying whatever settings that you already have. So to bring up this, you got to make sure that you press on the actual word, and in our case it would be transfer. So back to this, let's change our control for our opacity jitter to fade. And what we want to do is tell Photoshop how many pixels will it go until it fades. And at the moment, I was playing around with it and I was using a setting of 550 pixels. Now remember, this canvas, the size of the canvas is 1500 pixels. So it means that when I stroke my brush with my mouse, at around about 550 pixels, it will start to fade. Now, it will make a little bit more sense when I actually do it. So just copy my settings here. So opacity jitter is fade, and then the flow jitter also put fade here. And then let's just close that here. I'm just going to brush it here. And let's start off with our black color as our palette. So I'm going to reset that by pressing D on our keyboard. A flow of 5% is okay. Just make sure that our layer 1 is selected, our test layer. And you can see if I just resize that a little bit bigger, that it starts to fade at 500 pixels. Can you see that fading there? So obviously that's an exaggeration. So that tries to simulate the fading pressure of a pen. So I'm just going to undo a little bit of that. So Command Z, Command Z, Command Z. A quicker way, I'm just going to get my lasso tool here. Just going to lasso all this out and then just press delete on my keyboard. Let's deselect that, bring back our brush by hitting B on our keyboard, and let's just resize that a little bit smaller, something like 20 pixels. And then you can see that I can brush my mouse and it starts to have that same effect. Now, I'm more fluent with the pen, so my mouse strokes are not as good, but if you spend the time, you can start to replicate what I have on the right hand side here. So I'm just going to reduce the brush size here, and all I'm doing is just clicking and dragging, clicking and dragging. Now you can see I butchered this, but if you took the time out, you can replicate, I can assure you, this brush here. So once we're happy with our brush settings, we need to actually save it. Otherwise, every time that we select that brush, we're going to have to redo all our settings. So let's bring up our brush setting panels again. So F5 on our keyboard, and I'm just going to change it back to control equals pen pressure, because that's what I'm more comfortable with, as you can clearly tell by my effect here versus my mouse, my very poor mouse temp here. Now to save the brush setting, let's press on this plus icon here, and now I can just type in straight brush version 2 and press enter on the keyboard. So I'm going to go to our sample image here. Now remember, you can download this sample image. The link is in the description. Let's go to our new layer icon, because we don't want to ruin our image here. And let's just zoom in a little bit here, and let's test our brush here. So we don't want black as our brush color here, right? Because obviously her hair color is not black. So let's just undo that. And with the brush tool still selected, let's press Option or Alt on our keyboard, and then just sample her hair here. And then what I can do is just paint that as I like it here. So I can also change the blend mode just to blend it in a little bit more. So maybe darken, maybe multiply. You can play around with it. So in this case, maybe multiply. I can reduce my opacity and then just start doing it again here. That's probably too high, so let me just undo that. And you can get the picture, right? So this is before and this is after. So that's the hairbrush. Now I won't do all her hair around her face here. You can obviously do it in your own time. For now, we're going to create our second brush, which we're going to use on this image here. Now let's zoom in a little bit here, and obviously that her hair is a lot different to this hair, because this is straight and obviously this is curl. The steps to create a curly hair brush is largely the same, but it does have a little bit of quirks here. So let's go back to our blank canvas here. I'm just going to switch off this layer here. Before I do, let's rename this test, press enter, and let's turn that off. Let's make a new layer here. And what I'm going to do is, remember the first step is to create our pattern or our brush pattern. I'm going to press B on my keyboard to invoke the brush tool, and my previous brush here is still selected. I don't want that brush, so let's click on this down arrow here. Let's go back up to this. Let's select this hard round brush here, and let's make it maybe 95%, not 100%. And I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger, something like this. And oops, I almost made a mistake, which I told you in the beginning not to make, which is make sure that the flow is at 100 and our color, our foreground color is black. So we can press D on our keyboard to just reset that to black. I'm going to just press once here. And then what I'm going to do is just going to resize that a little bit smaller and maybe create a little bit of bump there, and that would be my brush. Well, I lie, it's not going to be my brush because I have to remove some of that. Now, the obvious removal tool is the eraser tool, but I don't want to use that, because if I press E on my keyboard to invoke my eraser tool, you see, this eraser brush has a different setting to what I was using. I need to manually resize it, and my flow might be different, my opacity might be different. So that's not my preferred way of erasing it. What I want to do is erase it with the same brush that I just used. So if I press B on my keyboard and then press the tilde key, which is next to 1 to the left of 1 on North American keyboards, I can start to use the eraser tool using the same settings. So all I'm doing is pressing the tilde key and then pressing once on my keyboard, and that would just erase that section there. Now I also want to erase this bit here, but I'm just going to increase the brush size a little bit here, press tilde on my keyboard and then press once on my mouse here, something like this. something like that. That would be the curl, and I want to remove this as well, so let's remove that. This canvas is a little bit too big to contain this, so remember to crop it to the size of what we've just created. Let's press Command on our keyboard and then click once on layer 1, and then press C to bring up our crop tool, and then press Enter or Return once and then twice to commit that, and that is basically our brush pattern. Let's go back up to Edit, Define Brush Preset, and then I'm just going to type this HTTP curly brush, press Enter. Now I want my canvas back again, so let's press Command Z to bring it back, and let's just center it by pressing Command 0, deselect that by pressing Command D. You can see here we've got a brush here, but it's nothing like what we want here, right? So as with the straight hairbrush, we need to change our settings. So let's just undo that a little bit. And who can remember how to bring up the brush settings? It's F5 for those who are playing along. Well done if you've got that right. With the spacing, is a bit too narrow, the spacing. Let's go back up to brush tip shape, and maybe let's move it maybe to 100. Now you can always change this later, so there's no right or wrong. You're not committed, it's not destructive in that way. So let's click on Shape Dynamic. Size Jitter is basically how much can the size vary, and I can vary it to 100%. So some of them will be double the size of the smallest one. You can play around with it. I'm just going to choose 76 for no reason at all. Angle jitter is how much you can rotate around, right? So maybe angle is 100%, and roundness jitter, it doesn't make that much of a difference, and basically is how tilted your brush would be. So let me try to explain it a little bit better. I'll go back up to brush tip shape, and the roundness, if you just look at this, if this is the top view of your brush, and if I change the roundness, you see how the tilt of the brush shape is changing, and that's what roundness does. So in this example that we've got here, it doesn't really do all that much, so it doesn't really matter, but you can still play around with it. Maybe we'll go 15-16% maybe. And then what I want to do is go to the dual brush. Before we go there, let's go to scattering. And scattering, as the word says, is how much you can vary in terms of the Y or X axis. You can change that here, you see, but we'll just change it in one direction. And the count is how much of it do you want. So count maybe something like this. If your hair is really, really tight, you can obviously bump it up all the way up to 16. So we'll do this something like this, and then the count jitter, how many instances of that do you want? So something like this. There's no right or wrong. Let's go back down to dual brush. Just a few seconds ago I almost jumped the gun, so we'll go down to dual brush, and then once you've got that selected, let's select our brush here, which is this one here. Now I know that because that's the size of that. So this is the brush here I've got selected here. So I just want to pick the one here. And what this is doing is saying, okay, well, with this brush, I'm going to, not this brush. With this brush, I'm going to apply the same brush using this blend mode. Let's click on that, and then you can adjust the size of the brush there. I'm just going to press this, maybe not, something like this, and then the spacing, again, you can space it out. This is the spacing of the second brush that we're applying it to. So that's why some of the brush tips here are not moving. It's only the second brush settings that's moving. So something like this. There's no right or wrong, as I keep saying. So once we're happy with it, let's test it out. And this is way too big. I'm going to press Command Z a few times, and let's just resize that just to make sure that we're happy with it before we make a preset out of it. So this looks okay to me, right? So this looks okay. So once it's okay, you can save a preset by clicking on this new brush preset here, and just going to delete these random numbers here. Version 2, press OK. Now remember, the reason why I'm saving this preset is because whenever I use this, I don't need to keep mucking around with all these settings. So let's just test out this brush here. So let's go to our image here. Let's just hide this, and remember to create a new layer so we're not damaging this layer here. Now forgive me, I'm going to use my pen on my tablet. You can replicate this on your mouse. There's no reason why you can't. I'm just more fluent with my pen. Let's just move this to the center here. I'm just pressing spacebar and then clicking and dragging. Now again, with the first straight hair brush, what we wanted to do was make sure that our brush was selected, and then I'm going to sample the color of this hair here, and just something like this. And then before I get started, let's just click and just do some random brush strokes here, and that looks okay, but we might want to change the blend modes to something like darken or multiply, so something like this. Let's just delete what we've got here. Make sure that layer 1 is selected, Command A to select all, and then just press delete. Let's deselect that, Command D. And now we can simply move this, just click and drag, right? Now if this is too much, we can obviously lower down our opacity, or we can sample a different hair color. So you can see here, if I want more fuzziness up here, I can just keep going here, and you can see that because we played around with the size jitter and all those other settings, that it's not all uniform. That's where you get the tight curls from. So let's just undo that, and I can just keep going. And as I keep going, don't forget to keep sampling the color by pressing Option on the keyboard to bring up our eyedropper tool here, and then you can just click on whatever color that you want. So apart from just using this as a brush tool to add more hair to this, you can also add some highlights, for example. So if I create a new layer, just switch that off, create a new layer here, and instead of using this color, the existing brownish color here, I'm going to just switch it to white, X on my keyboard, and maybe I'm going to select a different blend mode. Soft light is probably going to be what I want, and I'm going to just apply some of this, highlights here. Now you can see that it's probably too harsh here. I'm just going to undo all that, and what we could have done was just to reduce the flow a little bit to say 37%, and let's just try it again. So that is already looking a little bit better, or a lot better than if I were to use 100% flow. So you can see that I'm not being very careful with this. Now you can see some of the white has bled out of the hair here. It's not a problem. We can always mask that out. I'm going through this very quickly just to show you, and I can dial down the opacity a little bit. And now I'm going to exaggerate that effect here so you can see that I've gone out of bounds, and it's not a problem at all. All I can do, or what we can do, is just mask that out. So click on the background layer here with my properties panel open here. I'm just going to select subject. Photoshop's going to have a think about it, and this is the mask with selection that it's made. Let's go back up to our layer 2, because that's the layer that we want the mask to apply to, and let's select this one here, and straight away it's taking care of that. So this is before and this is after. So before, after. So you can use this brush not only to add to the hair here, you can also use it to selectively highlight her hair here. Now that is 2 custom brushes that you can use. Now while I've only gone through a straight brush for straight hair and then a curly hair brush for more tighter curled hair, you can obviously make the shape to whatever that you want. So if I were to have wavy hair, what I can do is, well, let's create a new layer here. Just going to turn that off, and with B selected on my keyboard, just going to select our soft round brush here, and let's select something like this. Let's dial the hardness down to around about 90, and what I can do is, well, let's bring up our flow back and make sure that our foreground color is black. Let's press D on the keyboard to make the default colors black and white, and then I want to reduce the size of it. So I'm just going to hand draw this slightly, just a wavy length here. I'm using a pen, so my strokes are relatively smooth. But if you're using a mouse, and let's just use a mouse here just for laughs so you can see how awful my control of a mouse is something like this, right? But you can crank up your smoothness all the way up to 100 and it will smooth the brush for you. Look how smooth that is. And you can see that there's a lag, is because that Photoshop is in real time translating all the jittering hand movements to a smooth line. And then once you've got that, you can simply copy or replicate the steps that I've just shown you for both the straight hair brush and the curly brush, and to make this into a brush. And that's how you can create all sorts of brushes in Photoshop. Now, if you learned something new, or if you liked what I've shown you here, please make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, and hit the bell icon so you can get notified for when the next video is out.